reduce the risks of massive flooding. If they had not listened to me in Germany, perhaps the judge would not have visited, but in this case it is a unique case where the judge, an authority, has come to visit, to see the issue of the glacier melt.
Oral hearings are set on March 17 and 19 at the Higher Regional Court of Hamm in Germany, according to local media Andina. German conservative leader and chancellor hopeful Friedrich Merz met with more leaders of European Union institutions on Thursday after talks a day earlier with Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas. EU Council President Antonio Costa received Merz on Thursday morning ahead of a European Union summit on Ukraine, at which Chancellor Olaf Scholz was expected to represent Germany. Merz, who is in the middle of trying to form the next German government following the February 23 election, arrived in Brussels on Wednesday, March 5th, where he was received by NATO Secretary General Marco Rutte. Portugal's Prime Minister proposed on Wednesday a confidence vote in his year-old minority government, risking his own dismissal as the main opposition parties vowed to defeat him. At the center of the political crisis that could trigger a third early election since 2022 is a consultancy firm owned by Prime Minister Luis Montenegro's family, which has made contracts with private companies in its political clarification. And this is the moment, Montenegro told Parliament. Montenegro's motion first needs cabinet approval and is unlikely to be voted before next Wednesday. If lawmakers reject it, the government would fall and assume a caretaker role pending a decision by President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa on whether to dissolve makers in the U.S. House of Representatives on Wednesday to defend their so-called sanctuary city laws, which restricts local officials in helping enforce federal immigration regulations. In his opening remarks, Committee Chairman James Conner, a Republican from Kentucky, told the mayors of Boston, Chicago, Denver, and New York City, all Democrats, that Congress should vote against sending even a single penny of federal funding to sanctuary cities. Some mayors have defended the laws as making all their residents safer. State and municipal officials have said the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment prevents the U.S. government from commandeering local officials to enforce federal law. New York Mayor Eric Adams, who is trying to get Trump to dismiss a federal criminal indictment charging him with corruption, has said he wants the city's laws weakened to allow cooperation with the federal government's deportation efforts where a migrant has been only accused but not convicted of a serious crime. In his remarks to the House, Adams said New York City always complies with local, state, and federal law. He said he had no tolerance for criminals, but also that he must create an atmosphere that allows every law-abiding resident, documented or not, to access vital services without fear of being turned over to federal authorities. The committee's ranking member, Rep. Jerry Connolly, asked Adams about accusations that he was pressured into cooperating with the Trump administration's policies on immigration in exchange for having his corruption charges dropped. Hundreds of protesters marched through Slovenia's capital, Ljubljana, and briefly blocked traffic on Wednesday to protest the local mayor's show of support for Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. Protester Ratko Stojiklifo said the protesters were upset Ljubljana Mayor Zoran Đaković had sent a Vučić letter offering him support, even as Serbia saw nationwide anti-government protests. Luka Miletic, a protester from the northern Serbian city of Novi Sad, said Serbia was being ruined by corruption. Protesters have blamed the collapse on corruption they linked to President Aleksandar Vučić's decade in power. Vučić's government has denied allegations of corruption and said it will launch a campaign to tackle the issue. Mozambican police fired on supporters of opposition leader Venancio Mondlane marching in the capital Maputo on Wednesday, injuring at least 10 people, Mondlane's team and a human rights researcher said. Footage captured from a sound truck at the rally showed the moment marchers scattered and took cover amidst the sound of gunfire. A police spokesperson confirmed that law enforcement had dispersed marchers but declined to elaborate. The date was verified by corroborating official reports and multiple eyewitness footage of the area. Clashes broke out in Athens on Wednesday between Greek police and demonstrators protesting over a 2023 train crash that killed 57 people in the country's worst rail disaster. The violence erupted after thousands of people peacefully rallied outside Parliament, where lawmakers debated a censure motion submitted by opposition parties against the centre-right government. Lawmakers from the main opposition, the centre-left PASOK party, and from leftist parties submitted a censure motion against Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis' government during a parliamentary debate on the disaster earlier on Wednesday. They said the government has lost its popular mandate since some of the biggest protests in Greece for years, accusing it of shirking responsibility over the crash and failing to fix critical safety gaps and covering up evidence. Earlier, demonstrators released lanterns into the air and held a moment of silence to honor the victims. The White House said on Wednesday it is reconsidering its pause in funding for Ukraine, and talks between the United States and Ukraine over a minerals deal are ongoing. U.S. President Donald Trump paused delivery of military aid to Ukraine late on Monday following a clash with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky last week. United States Vice President J.D. Vance, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said, and U.S. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard arrived in Texas to tour a portion of the U.S.-Mexico border. The three arrived at Laughlin Air Force Base and are first expected to take an aerial tour of the border around the area of ENUGU Pass, located on the eastern side of the border. Vance and Hegseth are reportedly the highest-ranking officials to visit the border since the inauguration of U.S. President Donald Trump, according to media reports. The visit comes as Trump is touting a drop in border crossings since he took office in January. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday met in Moscow with Badra Gumba, who won the presidential election in the breakaway Georgian region of Abkhazia. Acting President Gumba took almost 55% of the vote in Saturday's election in the Russia-backed territory, ahead of opposition leader Agor Azimba on just under 42%. Gumba, Abkhazia's vice president since 2020, took over as acting leader in November after his ally Aslan Barzania resigned days after protesters seized government buildings and forced him to scrap an unpopular investment deal with Russia. A large Black Sea coastal territory of about 240,000 people, Abkhazia broke away from Georgia after a war in the early 90s with the support of Russia. Moscow recognized Abkhazia as independent after another war in 2008. Most countries recognize Abkhazia as part of Georgia, which called the election another flagrant violation of Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Though the territory is politically and economically dependent on Russia, some Abkhazians have been critical of what they see as Moscow's growing influence. Israel's new military chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, and outgoing Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi participated in a change of command ceremony on Wednesday at the Kairia, Israel's military headquarters in Tel Aviv. Zamir was appointed after the resignation of Halevi due to the military's failure to prevent Hamas' deadly rampage on October 7, 2023. Zamir was promoted to the rank of Lieutenant General and became Israel's 24th military chief. The change of command comes as a standoff over the fragile ceasefire in Gaza increased the risk of a resumption of fighting without an agreement to bring home the remaining hostages still held by Hamas. Halevi led the military during the Israeli campaign in Gaza, which resulted in more than 48,000 Palestinian casualties and significant destruction in the enclave. However, he announced in January, soon after the Gaza ceasefire deal was agreed, that he would step down from his command. He accepted responsibility for the military's patchy and uncoordinated response to the October 7 attack. During the change of command day, both Zame and Halevi visited the Western Wall in Jerusalem and paid their respects at Mount Heres Memorial for fallen soldiers. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Wednesday there had been positive movement in cooperation with the United States that could lead to another meeting between the two sides soon. Kiev is eager to repair ties with its top military supporter against Russia's invasion after Zelensky publicly clashed with United States President Donald Trump and the White House last week over how to end the war in Ukraine. Yermak said on X he had exchanged views on security issues and the alignment of positions with Walz, and that they had scheduled a meeting of Ukrainian and U.S. officials in the near future to continue this important work. Both statements came just hours after CIA Director John Ratcliffe said the U.S. had paused intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is set for a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris. Orban said on Tuesday that he would talk to the French leader about the Ukraine crisis ahead of an extraordinary summit of European Union leaders scheduled for Thursday. Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer have held several calls separately with Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky since the presidents of the US and Ukraine held a fractious meeting last Friday in the Oval Office that led to suspension of US military aid to Kiev. Trump on Monday froze critical US military aid for Ukraine against Russia's 3-year-old invasion, following an explosive public confrontation in the Oval Office last week over a peace plan with Zelensky, who infuriated Trump by insisting the U.S. should provide security guarantees as part of any ceasefire. A handful of Europe's far-right figures, including Hungary's Viktor Orban, have backed Trump emphatically. Residents and visitors of Dubai gathered to watch the firing of the cannon on Wednesday, a tradition marking the breaking of the fast during the holy month of Ramadan. Set against the backdrop of Burj Khalifa, spectators watched members of the Dubai police fire the cannon as the sound of prayers echoed across the city. First Lieutenant Mata Ibrahim Al-Tayer explained the tradition. Before, in 1960 and 1950, there were no microphones for mosques. For one to hear in the houses the sound of adhan, that is call for prayers, or the sound of anything to inform them that it is Maghrib, that is prayers at sunset, and iftar, breaking of the fast. So the Emirates of Dubai used the cannons, he said.
Before, in 1960 and 1950, there were no microphones in mosques or similar means for all households to hear the sound of adhan, the call for prayer, or any sound notifying them that it was time for Maghrib, prayers at sunset, and iftar, breaking of the fast. So, the Emirate of Dubai used cannons, which were used during world wars, as a sound signal to notify people that it was time to break the fast during Ramadan, that they can break the fast and eat, having iftar.
I was actually running out of time. I thought I would be late for this, so I quickly asked the security guard where is the cannon firing happening. So I came running and I watched it. Luckily they were still going on, and the sound is crazy. So it's next time I will definitely bring my son here to watch this because he loves these things. So I will bring him here to watch this. This will be his first.
Cannon firing events took place in different locations across the city. Ramadan, the ninth and the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It is a month of austerity and of exercising self-restraint, during which fasting Muslims abstain from food and water from dawn to sunset. Volunteers from the Syrian Civil Defense rushed to put out massive wildfires in the mountainous countryside of the country's western port city of Latakia. According to an official post on the Syrian Civil Defense's official X account, volunteer firefighters took around 7 consecutive hours to extinguish the fires under challenging conditions. Local media reports said the volunteers from the Syrian Civil Defense, also known as the White Helmets, successfully extinguished the remaining wildfires across 20 patches of forest. The cause of the wildfires was not given. The governor of the northern Mexican state of Nuevo León said during a press conference on Wednesday that the state had registered 239 fires on Tuesday. The region's leader, Samuel Garcia, said the fires had happened mostly in vacant areas and caused damages to electricity towers. Garcia stated that the reason behind the fires was a cold front that entered the city during a dry period, causing a favorable environment for the fires to develop. National media has reported fires across the Monterrey metropolitan area, including the municipalities of Monterrey, Garcia, General Escobedo, Apodaca, Santa Catarina, and Guadalupe. So far, no fatalities have been reported, but air quality has been severely affected. Meanwhile, Spanish Coast Guard rescued a group of 58 migrants 14 miles off the Canary Islands on Wednesday and towed their boat to the port of Arneguin in Gran Canaria. Among the migrant persons was one woman who was taken to hospital, the Red Cross said. The 7 Spanish islands off northwestern Africa's Atlantic coast are struggling to absorb a surge in irregular migrants, mainly from Mali, Senegal, and Morocco. The Spanish archipelago hit an all-time annual high for a second year in a row, with 46,843 arrivals in 2024, constituting 73% of the irregular migration to Spain, according to data from the Interior Ministry. At least 9,401 migrants have made it to the Spain in 2025, including 7,138 to the Canary Islands, the latest Interior Ministry data shows. Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez on Wednesday accused the opposition of prompting the United States government's order to wind down Chevron oil exports in the Andean nation.
You saw what happened yesterday. There was a definitive sanction against the U.S. oil company Chevron. Who asked for that? Venezuelan extremists that have been defeated and failed. A decaying opposition without a nation. Opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, made a video congratulating and celebrating this action from the United States. U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio thinks he is damaging Venezuela, and Marco Rubio is enemy of the United States. Just imagine, a Secretary of State that is enemy of his own country, that wants to damage the United States. That's the impact this measure will have. They think it will damage Venezuela, and they don't know we are an invincible, indestructible people, destined for happiness and development. No one has ever seen a more anti-national, surrendered and dragged than that of this woman, perverse, insane. She is crazier every day. She lives hiding in a den because she's a coward.
Trump administration on Tuesday said it was ending a license that the U.S. had granted to oil producer Chevron, CVXN, since 2022 to operate in Venezuela and export its oil, after Washington accused President Nicolas Maduro of not making progress on electoral reforms and migrant returns. Chevron will have through April 3 to wind down exports and other operations in Venezuela, according to an update of the license published by the U.S. Treasury Department. The update supersedes the previous license granted to Chevron in November 2022, which allowed its operations to expand and Venezuelan exports to the U.S. to resume. The magnitude of the scale down was not immediately clear. A Chevron spokesperson said the company was aware of Trump's directive and would abide by any direction given by Treasury to implement it. Thousands of people poured onto the streets of Bannu in northwestern Pakistan on Wednesday for the funerals of 18 people, including 6 children, killed in a suicide attack on a security installation. Suicide bombers drove 2 vehicles packed with explosives into the town's military base in an attack staged by